This lecture is on research methods, which comes from chapter 1 of the textbook. A quote I like says, "To do successful research, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know of one thing that isn't known." And of course, that's the point of research, is to find out things that we didn't know, to learn about new things. So let's start out with asking, what is a theory? All research begins with a theory, which can be defined as ideas that can explain certain aspects of human thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. Psychology researchers create these theories to make predictions for future human behaviors or events that may occur if certain behaviors exist. And then we'll move on to a hypothesis, which allows a researcher to test that theory. A hypothesis is a precise, testable statement of what the researchers predict will be the outcome of the study. This usually involves proposing a possible relationship between two variables: the independent variable, which is what the researcher changes, and the dependent variable, which is what the research measures. So the main difference between a theory and a hypothesis is that a theory has been proven true through already completed research, and a hypothesis is a new prediction based on that previous research. So when we do research, how are participants for the study chosen? Ideally, researchers want to get a sample that is representative of the population, which is called a random sample, one in which every person in the population being studied has an equal chance of inclusion. With random sampling, any subgroup of people, whether that be blondes, joggers, liberals, or women, will tend to be represented in the sample in the same proportion they are represented in the total population. So in other words, if the sample you have, if 10% of those people in the population are blonde, for example, you would want 10% of your sample to be blonde, so they correspond with each other. That's the ideal, but it rarely possibly occurs because those people who respond to surveys, for example, are likely different from those who do not respond to surveys. It could be as simple as the fact that people who respond to surveys are more willing to contribute to research and find research helpful. So automatically you've got a different type of person than the average population. One way to combat this problem is to get a sample size as large as possible. The larger the sample size, the more likely it is to represent the general population. Another problem with surveys is that the questions can be biased. A systematic error introduced into sampling or testing by selecting or encouraging one outcome or answer over the other. So when we say something's biased, that means it favors one thing over the other. As you look at the chart on the right, some ways to minimize survey response bias: understand your demographic, understand who you're surveying. Don't ask leading questions. Leading questions, the way you ask the question affects the answer. Try to avoid emotionally charged questions. Use diverse questions and response formats, and use the right survey tool. So those are just some basic ways to minimize that bias in a survey. So let's look at a type of research called correlational research. This research asks if two variables are associated with each other. An example of that would be, do students who are bullied, one variable, do better on standardized tests, another variable? As you can see from the chart on the right, this is a positive correlation, which means as one increases, the other variable increases. So this chart indicates that the more bullying a student experiences, the more increased their performance on standardized tests is. It is important to note that correlational research only determines that there is a relationship between the two variables and not that one causes another. So we don't know whether bullying causes them to have greater performance on tests, or if having greater performance on tests causes increased bullying. We know there's a relationship, but we don't know which one causes the other. To combat that, we have experimental research. Again, the difficulty of determining cause and effect in correlational studies often prompts social psychologists to create laboratory simulations of everyday processes whenever this is feasible and ethical. So let's go back to the previous example of amount of bullying experienced in relation to performance on tests. As we mentioned, we know there's a relationship between the two, but again, we don't know which causes the other. As I already mentioned, does bullying affect how well students do on standardized tests? Or does a student's performance on a standardized test affect whether they are bullied or not? With correlational research, we don't know. We just know there's a relationship. And also, there might be a third variable that influences both the first, amount of bullying, and the second, performance on standardized tests. For example, students who are bullied might spend more time alone, therefore giving them more time to study, which leads to higher scores. So spending time alone would be even a third variable that explains both of them. Experimental research tries to control for this third variable. Correlational research cannot control for that third variable. Random assignment is a way to control for a possible third or even more variables. In experimental design, the assignment of participants or units to the different conditions of an experiment entirely at random so that each participant has an equal likelihood of being assigned to any particular condition. Each study participant is assigned to either the experimental group or the control group. What's the difference between those two? The experimental group receives the intervention and the control group does not. For example, let's look at the diagram to the right. If you look at the bottom, it says experiment. Will student test scores be affected by distracting sounds in the testing environment? So the experimental group is going to receive the intervention. They're going to hear the distracting sounds. The control group, however, doesn't get the intervention. They don't experience the distracting sounds. So we know that if the experimental group does worse, perhaps on their test scores, we know that that's means that the distracting sounds did affect them. So there's a difference between the experimental and control group. So why is replication of studies important? When the same or similar studies are replicated over and over again, that lets us know that the results aren't just a fluke. They didn't just happen by chance. The hypothesis lets us know that our conclusions from the study are likely correct and becomes a theory. A meta-analysis is what this is called. A meta-analysis is a study that combines the information from multiple studies to see if they all got similar results. And you'll see on the right a diagram of what meta-analysis looks at: defining a research question, collecting the data, analyzing the data, which that would be collecting several different research articles with different sources that done at different times, and then you report what you find. Do all the research articles seem to agree? Are the results replicated? The more they agree, the more reliable the research is going to be, which is why it's important to repeat research over and over again, because it makes the theory stronger. So that's it for research methods. I know that can be a little complicated, not the most fun thing to study. So hopefully that gave you a little idea of research methods in social psychology. But please let me know, as always, if you have any questions.